It is with great honor that I'm able to introduce our panel today. We have Karen O from Vornado, Carlos Valverde from Silverstein, and Christian Heimple from Brookfield. Excellent. Cool stuff. Please put your hands together for them. Excellent. And so to start things off, we want to set the stage. New York City is a very unique market. One of the easiest ways to realize that is to take into consideration the fact that the largest real estate owner in the city is the City of New York, our municipal government, and their annual budget is in fact larger than the next 19 largest US cities combined. A lot of people think because other real estate markets compare on a price per square foot basis here or there, that there are comparable markets, but again, really great way to level set is to stop and consider for a moment that our midtown office market in New York City has windowless basement space that rents for more per square foot than the top of Willis Tower in Chicago. It is a very unique place. However, the theory is, as this world continues to grow, density will become increasingly important. As more and more urban areas seek to embrace density, it's our belief that more markets will begin to replicate New York City's strangeness and follow in its footsteps. And so today we want to help you better understand a bit about New York City's market by having a casual conversation with some of the leaders in the real estate space, help you better understand what goes into their work and what the output of some of their work has been of late. And if all of that sounds good, we're going to dive in. Sound good? Excellent. And so let's start with some intros. Would you please say a bit about your company, your role, and how you came to have that role?
Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, sure. My name is Karen O. I'm the Director of Energy Solutions for Vornado Realty Trust. We are predominantly existing buildings, so we own and manage about 28 million square feet of office and retail, primarily here in Manhattan. My background is I'm a chemical engineer by training. Made my way into Con Ed, where I worked for over 10 years. And with that utility experience, it was actually a pretty smooth transition to the owner side. So having seen the utility side, construction, and bringing in, of course, steam, electric, and gas services into buildings, there are certain useful aspects of having worked in the utility now that I'm on the owner side. And that is my intro.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Christian Heimple with Brookfield Property Partners. Brookfield is a multinational real estate developer, primarily an asset manager of real assets. Brookfield Property Partners is a division of that larger umbrella and focuses primarily on real estate in central business districts throughout the world. So on 5 continents, about $195 billion in assets under management. I'm the Vice President of Construction in New York City, so I primarily focus currently on Manhattan West, our development on the west side of Manhattan. Got into this role via engineering background, like Karen. I was a structural engineer, worked with a firm in New York City, and then moved over to the real estate side thereafter.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Carlos Valverde. I'm Vice President of Development at Silverstein Properties. Silverstein Properties is a family-owned business. We've been in business for a little over 50 years now. The company is managed still daily by 87-year-old Larry Silverstein. And we are a multi-family or multi-dimension real estate industry corporation where we do real estate development, finance, investment, bridge loans, and ultimately we're diving into technology. And so our role here today is to obviously share with you what technologies we're using for new high-rise structures, but also as well to be able to explain to you guys how we're interested in utilizing some of the real estate technologies that we're seeing in the market today. And I'm an architect by background.
Excellent, thank you. And so one of the most thrilling parts of New York City Real Estate Tech Week is how international a group of attendees are brought here. And so to help them better understand this market in particular, I was hoping we could start with a process-oriented question. Let's say somewhere out here in the audience, there's someone who has $2 billion burning a hole in their pocket. What's the process to turn that money into a super tall office in New York City?
We only have 45 minutes.
What are the major phases of that process?
Well, assuming you want to get into this headache, because it is. It's building in New York City it's very challenging. From finding the land to finding the right team to build this, it's a challenge in the ways that you would never really encounter. Because the interesting part is that you only get to build a new building every 5 or 6 years, right? Because that's the amount of time that it takes you to develop the full building. And so by that time, most of the regulations that the city's implemented, the codes have already changed from the last time you did it. And so it wasn't until this year that I started for the first time using the 2014 New York City codes, right? I've been using the 1968 building codes to build and design buildings for my entire career. And I'm already 5 years behind, and I know there's going to be new ones coming up later on. And so in that sense, making sure that if you have the $2 billion, if you really wanted to get into this game, you really have the stomach for it, because it's not for the faint of heart, in my opinion.
Agree 100%. Yeah, I think unique to New York City, maybe not unique to major cities, but Chicago, New York, LA, they all have major approval processes with, in New York we call it a ULURP, which is really a zoning board approval. It's a very long process. If you're changing the zoning of a site, it could take up to 2 years, just in terms of a government approvals standpoint. And beyond that, plan approvals with the Department of Buildings here can be very lengthy as well. So we see that on the front end lasting 3 years of a development cycle, just the planning approvals process, government approvals.
And so let's say you're fortunate enough to have a plot of land, you have your plan and necessary approvals. As you're thinking about putting up this building, how do you balance priorities like time, money, resiliency, sustainability, and so on?
I think there's a lot of variables, right? And so the first one is, like everything, is it worth it to build it today? Is it worth it for me to build it? Assuming all these go, no go questions are go, 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 you do your pro formas, you do your cash flows, and are you getting the returns that you really want to get into based on your investment, right? One of the interesting things about real estate development is that you're always trying to look ahead into the future. Whatever you're deciding today, as far as, hey, here's a plot of land, I have my investors, I have a team on board, you actually won't receive any revenue probably till year 2 when you're finally built, which is 6, 10, 12 years from the moment you decide, I actually want to build this building. And so you're thinking so far ahead into the future that it's sometimes, actually always, a challenge to figure out what is it that we want to do. Are you leasing this building to a variety of tenants? If so, which tenants, right? When we were building when we were rebuilding the World Trade Center, for example, we were designing these buildings in 2010 to the fire industry, right? Financial, insurance, real estate. And it turns out that a lot of those tenants were really reducing the amount of employees that were holding in these companies. And now it's all about the TAMI tenants, technology, advertising, media, internet, and they have a totally different sense of how they view their tenants. Mobility is a priority, open spaces, a democratization of how people work is so much more important to them right now than and I'm sorry if I offended any of the lawyers in the room, but having your traditional wood-paneled perimeter office, which is really not the case that we're seeing. And so you have to make this decision so far ahead in advance that you almost have to be, a magician to try and figure out what the next big thing in real estate leasing they're going to want to do. I'm sure you guys see a lot of it as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the planning process and what tenant do you go after, right? That affects the floor plate size tremendously. A service company might want 35,000 square feet as a typical floor plate size. That's very efficient for that type of tenant. But open floor plan, tech companies want closer to 45, 50,000. And that's a decision you have to make 10 years in advance. From the day you say, go, I want to spend $2 billion, what tenant do you want to chase? It's the crystal ball.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How is it similar or different for major retrofits, Karen?
It is pretty similar even for a retrofit situation where, increasingly we're seeing that tenants want the entire floor or multi-floors with, the internal staircase so they can get from one floor to another without having to access the elevator. So certainly, it's not that we're targeting a specific type of tenant, but we're just noticing that there's this shift in what tenants generally want in their space.
Thank you.
And to that, Karen, it's also how are you as a building, it's kind of weird to say it, but flexible enough to be able to support all these sorts of tenants? And sometimes you make decisions that end up being really good decisions, and sometimes you make decisions where money is spent, and unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about it. I'll give you, just the one quick example. One of the projects that we built recently, we decided that we should purchase a 2 megawatt generator and install it on a very high mechanical floor, right? In case there was a need that we saw these tech tenants, we thought, well, they're really going to want to have emergency power in the building in case there's a outage. Turns out that it really doesn't matter to them because they're so mobile. Everything they do is already on the cloud or networks elsewhere, that for them to be physically present in the office is not a priority. And so we have a very expensive paperweight sitting in one of our mechanical floors, and we're trying to figure out how to market it differently, to say the least.
Well said. I do want to drill into the flexibility you started with just now. And so are there any tools you all swear by when it comes to pursuing these projects?
Tools.
From a management perspective.
I personally still use Excel. It works for me. Then again, I'm not working on new developments like my co-panelists. For me, I'm focusing on energy efficiency retrofits. So, if you're upgrading a chiller plant, I think it's manageable to use Excel. I don't know what kinds of tools you might need to build a building from the ground up, but.
I think we try to maintain flexibility for the tenants and the different classes of tenants we'll have in terms of generator capacity or infrastructure of any kinds, cooling, making sure that we have in a new property excess capacity so that we can have the flexibility.
Right. One of the very interesting things for us is how even though there's incredibly smart people in their industry wanting to lease spaces in our buildings, they also may not have the capacity to see three-dimensionally like a lot of architects and engineers can. And so, a very simple tool like AR and VR goes a very long way in trying to resolve issues for these tenants where you say, well, there's a column here every 35 feet, and you put a beam here, and they can do a stair opening, and all the services and the plumbing, and it's really not a big deal. Well, it's not a big deal to us who are in real estate and get how you do a core opening and slab opening, but to people whose main business is not real estate, but rather technology or banking or administration or finance, whatever, for them to be able to visualize this with literally just the Oculus lens or the 3D goggles as you're walking through an empty floor plate is hugely valuable. Because they can actually feel and see what it really means. And different people see it different ways. Some people can read floor plans, some people rather do renderings, some people want to get out there and walk an empty floor plate trying to figure out this is what my office is going to look like. So you try to cater, you try to be flexible to how you're reading your audience and figure out the best way to make them understand. Because ultimately, these buildings, in many ways, they sell themselves. It's about making them understand, is this building the right fit for your business? Not just today, but in 15 years from today.
Thank you. And so the city is a fast-changing place. I was hoping for our audience's sake, you all would be willing to describe some of the neighborhoods that you're operating and building in. And so Christian, would you mind going first and speaking a bit about what led Brookfield to Manhattan West?
Sure. Yeah, Manhattan West has a long history for us, going back to 1986 when we first purchased the first parcel of land there. So our current CEO was actually part of that purchase in 1986. So a lot of history for us. And assembled pieces over the years, both on the north and south side. The underlying railroad tracks, which undercut the site, are actually on land that we purchased back in the late 80s. And Amtrak has easement throughout that property. But really the linchpin was really development cycles and figuring out a way to build over that site, and technology as well, construction technology. So the challenge with that site is it's an active railroad. There's 16 train lines that pass through that site directly going into Penn Station. And the challenge is, how do you build something that's 250 feet wide over an active railroad track that you could shut down maybe 3 hours a week? So for us, it was several iterations of the technology to bridge that distance in a single span and be able to cap over the railroad and use that as a platform for the rest of the development. So I'm really going into a lot more detail than you probably wanted, but Manhattan West, we'll go back a bit, is bound by 9th, 10th Avenues and then 31st and 33rd Street. So it's a 2-block mega campus that we're developing, named it Manhattan West. It's a Brookfield Place brand, and it's got 2 new commercial office buildings, a new residential apartment building, new hotel, and then a renovation of 2 existing buildings. So all in all, it's about 7.5 million square feet of development, which we commenced in 2011 and anticipate completing in 2023. So currently wrapping up 1 Manhattan West, which is the first new commercial office tower, 2.1 million square feet. And then we're rolling right into the next commercial tower currently, starting with steel this month. So that's another 2 million rentable square feet.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Karen, would you mind speaking a bit about why Penn Plaza and perhaps 6th Avenue and Park Avenue corridors are important to Vornado?
Sure. So for us, we have a lot of holdings around the Penn Station area. And what we're realizing is that there's a lot of value in being close to sources of transit. So Penn Station certainly is a hub for all of the major subways. You have the Amtrak, you have Long Island Railroad, and we're realizing that a lot of our tenants aren't mainly in New York City. We're realizing that they have locations all over the country, sometimes all over the world. So what we see is that for some of our tenants who might have an office in DC, they can take the Acela, get into Penn Station within 2 hours, and then be at their next meeting without sometimes even leaving the underground transit hub. So there's definitely a lot of value in being close to the transportation sources. Other than that, I would say that most of our buildings are situated in Midtown Manhattan, and that's really because Vornado's genesis was retail and shopping malls. So a lot of the current luxury retail market is still situated in Midtown Manhattan, and our buildings are kind of clustered around that same market.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Carlos, would you mind briefly sharing some of the history that led up to 3 World Trade Center?
Sure. 3 World Trade Center, located on the 16-acre campus of the World Trade Center. It's the last building that we've completed just this past year. We still have 1 more to go to World Trade Center, which we can talk about later, Ryan. But the campus essentially is a multi-use development that has both transit, retail, office buildings, the 9/11 Museum and Memorial. It's connected by 13 different subway lines. And we have a great tenant base, mostly advertising, technology, and media tenants. Uber recently signed 7 floors at 3 World Trade Center. Spotify took the top 10 floors at 4 World Trade Center. Condé Nast at Tower 1, Moody's, great variety, and we feel it's a great part of town to be located in, which is the downtown financial district, Tribeca area. If you guys haven't been to the new World Trade Center, I highly encourage you to go.
I can echo that without reservation. But I'd like to dive now into some of what we've touched upon. The tenant expectations and demands you all are predicting with your crystal balls. Would you mind reiterating and diving deeper into some of the trends you've observed of late and have endeavored to solve for?
I could start. When Vornado first started their capital energy efficiency program around the 2012 timeline, the focus was really to save energy. So we pass all of the owner's utility costs directly onto our tenants without any kind of markup. So if we have the opportunity to incorporate any energy efficiency upgrades, lower landlords' utility costs, and then down the line, the tenants will see those decreases in utility costs. That was the original kind of selling point. What we've been noticing more and more is that in addition to the energy savings, our tenants are starting to ask about wellness in their space. So what are we doing as landlords to improve air quality or daylighting within their space? And it's a question that's starting to crop up more and more. So it's something that we're trying to think about when we do energy efficiency upgrades, because truthfully, when you're thinking about any kind of retrofit that's going to decrease energy, it's not always going to jive with some kind of technology that will improve air quality. So one, you want to open your dampers wide open, bring in all this fresh outside air. It's not necessarily what we want to do on the energy efficiency side. So kind of finding that balance has been something that we're starting to look at more and more.
Thank you.
So on the new construction side, what we see is really 2 major aspects of what tenants are looking for. One, it's the amenities. What else is on the campus? What else do we have to offer? So we focus on placemaking and really making a culture, an environment in the area through Brookfield Arts and Events program that we have. And really that's creating culture at the streetscape with retail, events, engagement of the tenants within the space. But also they're looking for hotels either on campus or nearby, gym facilities, daycare, really providing an all-around experience. And then on the technology side, what we're seeing is a lot more integration into our building systems, which we traditionally are not used to doing on the owner-developer side and allowing tenants to tie in. But really, there's a push for tying in for BMS systems, security systems, all throughout our elevator control systems, being able to tie our base building data into their own systems so they know when the visitors come onto the elevator or their CEO, so they can light up the HVAC in his or her office. And security systems, they want to look at the lobby cameras. And BMS, they want to be able to control their after-hour air. They want to be able to monitor the set points. On the wellness standpoint, they want to be able to control and monitor all those activities and the CO2 in the return air, multiple aspects that in the past, 10, 15 years ago, you'd see a lot less of that. Now it's almost becoming standard.
Beautiful, thank you.
I agree with my colleagues here, Karen and Christian. I mean, it's really, the tenant base is so sophisticated right now that what they're looking for and what they want far exceeds every single time what we think that they actually want. I have to give a lot of credit, I feel, to the way the Google campus was originally developed, right? As a collegiate, sort of your soul university idea, because it seems a lot of the trends have sort of started there or were kind of born there in the fact that we still want to have people to feel like they're in an academic environment, but that they also have to produce. And at the same time, they also have to be able to work. And a lot of what we're seeing is a derivative of that original idea that started in the early 2000s, where people want convenience and they want mobility. One of the things that we're seeing right now is the hoteling office concept, which nobody has an assigned desk. It's extremely challenging for many reasons. First and foremost is the human cultural aspect of it, right? How do you tell a 50-year-old executive who's always had an office, all of a sudden you don't have an office anymore? Every day you have to log into an app to see what office you can get. It's a real challenge. I mean, and it's funny to think about it that way, because most recent grads work that way at school and in the universities, but people that have had a lifelong career working that way are very uncomfortable adjusting to it. And so I think, just like in everything we do, it's not about just the technology, but how we as humans adapt to it. And second, does it work for your company? How do you transition from that? And we've seen cases of success and cases yet to be determined.
Thank you. I do want to dive deeper into both of your answers in particular, though, because it seems to me that amenities, convenience, and placemaking aren't new. And so how do 3 World Trade Center and 1 Manhattan West compare to older assets in your portfolio from this particular perspective?
I think from a placemaking perspective, it's not new. I think there's just more of a demand for that being as base expectation. And we see tenants getting more sophisticated in what they're looking for and asking for. And as they've experienced, past properties and past offices, they want to look for something better. And for us, we're able to show them Brookfield Place downtown. We can show them how we operate large facilities and campuses with placemaking events. And frankly, it's not new. We've been doing it for decades now. But we've definitely upped the effort in terms of the number of events and the quality of events over time, and really made for a different experience, something that differentiates them from the market.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we see, for example, at 3 World Trade Center, when we first assigned the project, we had 3 different setbacks. 1 big setback at the podium and 2 at the higher levels. And we never thought that these would be anything other than mechanical setbacks. And as we started to build the building and lease up the building, our leasing marketing team thought it would be attractive to create terraces out of these setbacks. And it's not a novel idea, but it's a challenging idea, especially when you're in the middle of construction, because you have to have what would normally be a zoning group for mechanical turning into an amenity space or an activity space with a higher code requirement for egress and lighting, and et cetera. And so, all of a sudden, these peripheral spaces that you would once used to have that maybe you thought don't really have a value to them, all of a sudden become a valuable asset to them. Bicycle parking, huge issue that we're all developers we're dealing with right now, because whether you bike or not, tenants are going to ask for parking spots for 50 people. They used to ask for parking lots. People don't drive anywhere anymore, right? On a residential side, the Amazon packages, both dry goods and frozen goods. The last thing you want to see when you pay $10 million for your new office or your new condo is behind your doorman 30 boxes of Amazon packages, because that's what people do. They order toothpaste from Amazon, and it's a big box for a tiny little tube. And the reality is, you want to be able to manage that. You can't say don't order it. You can't say limit how you order. You got to figure out ways how do you store it and get it out and make it convenient. The Amazon lockers are great, but they don't work for everybody. Same thing with the store with the cold or frozen goods. People get their foods delivered from Fresh Direct or whatnot, and so you got to be able to have now cold rooms for these type of storages in your residential buildings. And so, as technology changes, we need to adapt. And unfortunately, brick and mortar takes a while to adapt. It's expensive, but if we don't keep up, then we're not doing our jobs.
I think you're 100% correct, and I think you touched on this briefly, that spaces that were traditionally undesirable are suddenly being snapped up so quickly. So, underground mechanical spaces are being taken over by tenants because they want showers and a napping room for guests that are visiting from overseas, and green spaces, any available setbacks tenants want to take over so that they can create, outdoor spaces for their employees. So it's getting harder and harder to fit what we need at a base building level into the available spaces once the tenants start taking a lot of these formerly ugly spaces. Yeah.
Would you mind saying a bit more about those challenges as you endeavor to help existing assets compete with these newcomers?
So some of the challenges certainly is space. And I think you mentioned this earlier when it comes to things like backup generators. We'll install them in our buildings, and we're noticing the same thing. We think that our tenants will be interested in leasing out a couple of kW off that generator, and they're not interested. So we're kind of trying to figure out the next thing. So things like battery storage, which are at the moment not completely allowed by the fire department. But it's one of the things that we're thinking that, utility rates are expensive in New York City. It's one of the most expensive in the country. So to the extent that we can charge up batteries on available roof spaces or setbacks that are not taken over by a tenant, if we can find a way to charge those batteries on the off hours and discharge them to lower our peak demand during the day, it's one of the things that we're kind of thinking about and trying to push along, because we think that it's going to be a game changer in the city.
Thank you. Since you brought up the fire department, and Carlos earlier mentioned building codes, would you mind speaking a bit about how fire and life safety in large commercial assets has evolved over the past few decades?
Sure, I can take that one. So, it's come a long way. I think the bombings of the Trade Center in 1993, as well as 9/11, have really changed the codes in terms of how we operate in New York for fire and life safety. Starting with the simple things of just photoluminescent strips and stairwells. That was something that was just, in 1993, that saved lives, and it was something that was done in that property. It wasn't code required, and now it's done in every stairwell in New York. It's the simplest thing that starts from there, all the way to ARC systems, which are repeater systems for the fire department within buildings. Now that's a requirement for a high-rise, so that the fire department never loses signal within the building. And it's another digital system that we have within our properties that just layers on to all the other technologies we're bringing on board, but it's just one more that we bring on for life safety.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think the first responder system, the ARC system, having a neutral cellular backbone in your building, and all the sort of things that are part of the life safety requirements of a project are really important for developers in the industry to continue to push the highest safety standards, because ultimately you're really dealing with people's life and safety here. And so the quarterly training that people do on knowing how to egress your building, also being up to date on code changes are of extreme priority. And I think, for the people in this room as technologists, I think it's very important to be able to help developers and building owners and building managers facilitate that. I think that's an area that's extremely underserved by technology, mostly having to do, I feel, because one, it's a very extremely complicated business to understand, because it's mostly people that are, ex-firefighters or fire marshals or fire life safety directors that do this, and that may not be necessarily very interested in the technology side. But I bet you if you called every fire life safety of every building in Midtown or downtown, they are urging and want technology that will be able to help them figure out how to egress safely, figure out how to do smoke damper checking, et cetera. I think that's a huge opportunity for a lot of technologists out there that really hasn't been, I believe, even started to really grow.
Yeah, and today's life safety systems are getting more and more complicated. I know it sounds cliche, but we used to design high-rise buildings with, say 1,000 points on the fire alarm system. Today, I think our One Manhattan West has over 11,000 points. It's just a tremendous amount of volume and data coming back into that system, and the skill level that you need to operate those systems is above and beyond what we saw 10 years ago. It's very challenging.
Thank you. And so I think it's safe to say that our high-rise buildings are getting safer. Are they also becoming more resilient? If so, are there any technologies chiefly responsible for those improvements?
I think our buildings are getting safer, but the truth is, I think high-rises in New York City are always going to remain a target, unfortunately. So we are always thinking about resilience in the event that, God forbid, another attack should happen. How do we get our tenants out of the building safely? So we are always thinking about resilience. So, batteries, for example, besides being able to shave peak during the day, we think that there's an opportunity to put, emergency life safety devices, maybe perhaps connect those to battery systems as well, just to make sure that we can get all of our building occupants out of buildings safely.
Yeah, I think one thing we used to take for granted in the past was public utilities. Before the blackouts, before major terrorist events, we used to think that the utilities would always be there, electricity, water, everything. And now we design buildings with the mindset that what happens when I take 1, 2, or 3 of those away, and making sure the building still operates, and you can get people to either work safely there if they want to, or if they want to leave, get out of the building safely. And so we focus on generator capacity to allow us to really operate the building full-time with life safety functions, as well as additional power to allow tenants to operate if they choose to.
You're definitely 100% correct about the utilities. We're now seeing that our tenants, before they sign the lease, they want to know where the nearest Con Ed substation is, how many Con Ed services come into the building, where they're located, and if it's possible, they actually physically want to connect to both services for redundancy should one feeder experience an outage. So tenants are getting very savvy.
Which is challenging, of course, because Con Ed doesn't want to know where the 2 grids interconnect.
No.
Right? Same thing with Verizon, and same thing with all these utility services. They don't really want you to know where their nodes are and how they distribute around the city. And so, we get it, but it's also that it gets to a point where there's a certain sense of impracticality, because ultimately, if there's no power, is there even a subway line working to get you to your building, right? If you still have 3 or 4 emergency power generators, can you get diesel fuel to them, right? If there's no cars available to run or people available to get to the truck stations. And so, there's a point of where you can get into this idea of there's a doomsday scenario every single time, but you also have to scale back and realize, okay, what do we really want to achieve here? And a lot of times it's psychological for the people that work in the building and for the people signing the leases, right? Did you do your due diligence, and are you providing the best, safest environments possible within reason, right? Within reason. I think that's a very important keyword right there, because there's no limit to how catastrophic you can get to any one of these conditions. And so I think within reason, everything is possible.
Thank you. One of the common refrains on this panel has been that systems are getting more complicated. Tenants are expecting more control over systems that you all are responsible for. And so I'm hoping you all would be willing to speak a little bit about what connectivity means to you all today versus in the past. And because you can't talk about connectivity without cybersecurity, if you wouldn't mind speaking a bit about how that has factored into your jobs now.
I don't know how long ago this happened, but I think there was a case, I think it was in Vegas, where somebody maliciously hacked into a temperature sensor in a fish tank and was able to back their way into, very sensitive financial information. And when that news came out, our IT and cybersecurity team just jumped. And they said, no longer are we allowing any vendor devices on our backbone. We don't want any tenant BMSs on the backbone. So, there's a lot of conversation, right now about how we are going to physically separate and air gap tenant and base building systems. But I'm not going to even pretend I understand the language that they're, the lingo and tech speak, but it's definitely at the forefront of what we're talking about.
Just on the connectivity point, what we are seeing now is really just a convergence of all of our building systems, as opposed to letting each vendor install their own disparate networks, BMS, lighting controls, security. We want to take control of that, install our own network, converged network in our buildings, and be able to control the cybersecurity and the firewalls and make sure that's really a managed system that we control, and then all those subsystems ride on that network. So that's really how we're managing cybersecurity currently. It still takes some getting used to in terms of the subcontractor market and then the contractor market to understand how to do that and find the expertise out there to implement it well. There's definitely growing pains in the New York construction market there.
Thank you.
I think, yeah, you're right. The converged network is one of the things that we're looking into as well. I think there's a huge demand for having restrictions on how open and vulnerable your network can be, and cybersecurity is a top priority at Silverstein Properties. And so there's a lot of things that we're doing, and I'm with Karen. I'm not going to sit here and tell you exactly what it is that we're actually doing, but I think it's a very important idea that now systems in buildings are no longer just your brick and mortar, steel and curtain wall and concrete, but they're becoming so specialized that we're looking to have people that are specialists on these systems, right? The BMS, the security, the elevator, the fire alarm, really come into organizations and help us commission them and develop it in a way that makes sense. Because first of all, what we said earlier, by the time you finish designing, there's already something new, better the day you're installing it. So, one little lessons that we learned is when you're developing your security specs, don't specify the camera, because when you're buying the camera from the security contractor, the smallest possible camera is already in the market. And by the time he actually gets to install it 3 years later, there's already something even newer. And so it's kind of silly that we're always putting things on hold because we always know there's going to be something better. So how do you create, again, sort of a broadband? How do you create a network that's so resilient and so broad that it can actually power what you're going to be installing 5 years down the road? One of the things that we're seeing right now that we're probably going to be installing on the project is PoE lighting, power over Ethernet lighting. And PoE is not a new concept. You have it on cameras and you have it on networks and Wi-Fi spots. But PoE lighting, essentially, you have LED lamps that are able to be managed, controlled with PoE, just Cat5, Cat6 cable. And so that is something that's really interesting. That's something that our engineers are looking at. But the amount of broadband that you need in order to light up a room like this is tremendous. And so, we used to think that you needed 4 or 6 inch conduits for 2 or 3 servers. Now it's actually the opposite. You need telecommunication branches that go up the building that are extremely robust. And, it's a new challenge that we have to figure out as far as how we develop the core, how we develop shaft pays, and who knows what tomorrow will bring.
That is an excellent transition for the last question I have for you. Ultimately, as you look into your crystal balls to try and predict what tomorrow will bring, other than PoE and battery storage, are there any technologies you're particularly excited to bring to market? And are there any technologies you're very excited about, but that you don't feel the market is ready for?
I'll go. I'm very excited about artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think the fact that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface on the AEC Contech industry with this, because I think there is so much data out there, so much output from architects, engineers, utility companies, that I think it's been very hard to really be able to embrace all this information that's out there, because in many senses it's proprietary. And my organization might not want to share with you, or Brookfield, or Vornado. But at the same time, I think that ultimately we're going to need an open source platform to be able to really harness all this power that we have, because I think it's really going to change the way we design, build, and manage buildings. And so for that, I'm extremely excited about it. And I think in our lifetime, we're going to see AI designed structures, buildings, office spaces. No, 100% don't doubt it.
Really, I think our approach is building flexibility. Because every time we try to crystal ball things, 5 years later, we're proved wrong, or something better came along. And the development cycle of these projects is so incredibly long that you're planning 5 years ahead from when you'll open for a tenant that's going to be in the building for 15 years. And for a property you're going to own for at least 100. So being able to build in the flexibility is, I think, the best thing that we can do, whether it's a converged network, so that you have the ability to bring that data together. We're embarking on an effort to introduce digital twins for our buildings now on our new structures, which for us is really just flexibility. It's the ability to conglomerate all the data points that are coming in. Much as a converged network is capturing the ones and zeros from devices, the digital twin is really capturing that data and bringing it to one repository that we can use in the future for something else, whether it's AI analysis of temperature settings and HVAC settings, or something else that we don't even know about today. But really, it's about planning for the future and being able to have that flexibility.
Beautiful.
For us, we're also starting to think about developing the digital twins, but kind of for a different reason. With these stringent new climate mobilization laws that are coming into effect in the next 5 to 10 years, we have to think about what we need to do in order to meet these rigorous new compliance standards. So kind of having this energy model where we can change the inputs and outputs and figure out what kinds of upgrades, especially if it's a capitally intensive upgrade, what we need to do in the next couple of years to make sure that we're not going to be on the hook for sometimes millions of dollars in fines, is something that we're thinking about.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for sharing today. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you all did as well. Please join me in thanking them.